It is time to review Chapter 243 of JJK. And the thing I really want to talk about in this review is the fact that Yuta Okkotsu showed up and chopped off Kenjaku's head. And normally I'd say this is the biggest moment we've had in months, but we did just have Gojo get chopped in half like 2 months ago, so it's kind of hard to top that. But this one is definitely a runner-up, at least for me, so let's dive into it. So in this chapter, we saw that Takaba, he had his need for comedy fulfilled, and it kind of looked like the fight was over and Kenjaku was about to just execute Takaba, but then we get the reveal of Yuta. And while Takaba's technique may have shrouded Yuta's approach and his high cursed energy output, he straight up perception blitzes Kenjaku here. Kenjaku sees him behind him, tries to turn around and use anti-gravity, but Yuta appears behind him for the second time in the chapter and chops his head off. Even though Yuta had the benefit to build up this high output thanks to Takaba, and that's probably what is required to kill Kenjaku with one shot like this, it's still pretty hard to argue he didn't just blitz Kenjaku here. But that's enough of the power scaling takes. I want to talk about how Kenjaku could survive this and what his options might actually be. This would be the moment that we finally get to see Kenjaku's fourth curse technique or how his brain swap CT actually works. But I have seen some people talking about Kenjaku taking Gojo's body. Okay, I have to talk about this because this is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. First of all, they had to teleport to get here, and Kenjaku isn't even in the same barrier as Gojo's corpse. Also, Gojo's death and his body was like one of the most unceremonious executions in JJK. He got chopped into 4 pieces, and those pieces are on the battlefield that everyone is fighting Sukuna on. What is Kenjaku going to do? Anti-gravity his head and float over? And then somehow take Gojo's body while nobody notices and then regenerate it. And if he regenerates Gojo's body, well, he'll have no pants, and Gege is not drawing that. There are just too many steps to go through for him to get Gojo's body at this point, and Yuta would really have to cataclysmically fumble and let him get away. And if Kenjaku wants to get out of this through combat, he's going to have to fight a full power Yuta who is staring right at him. And he'd have to do that while being a disembodied head that already fumbled the first time. Getting his head chopped off was not part of the plan. He was definitely trying to stop this. So unless he has some curse technique or some major curse energy pop off that gives him the greatest regeneration we have ever seen in Jujutsu Kaisen, or he is such a unit that he is able to 1v1 Yuta Okkotsu from 100 to 0 as a head, I think he's just done here. And that brings me into Kenjaku's actual plan because he doesn't seem that upset about being put down. I've had my doubts about the merger plot for a long time, especially when they tell us everybody has to die except for Megumi and Geto, and that's just not going to happen. Even Yuta brings up the fact that if they don't die, the merger just doesn't happen at all. I don't think it's ever going to happen in JJK, or at least not in the way people think. I think that Kenjaku is just full of it, and he has been lying this entire time. The culling games most certainly have a purpose, but it is a purpose he has not told the truth about, and Tengen has also refused to reveal. Prior to Gojo vs Sukuna, we see that Kenjaku says even if Gojo weren't going to kill him if he left Sukuna's side, he never intended to make a move until today. So what is happening today that he has previously mentioned before in his plan? Well, that would be the battle between Yuji and Sukuna, because I'll just say my piece on this. I think that he is referring to Yuji when he says, "My will be passed on." I think that Yuji Itadori is the linchpin of Kenjaku's plan, and there is a reason why Kenjaku is never particularly worried about Yuji's survival. In Chapter 213, Sukuna gets free and actively tries to instantly kill Yuji Itadori, but Yuji survives and approaches Sukuna, who is a little confused that Yuji is still alive. Before Yuji gets an amp in strength and actively shocks Sukuna, who in his own internal dialogue wonders where this came from. And immediately the light bulb goes off in Sukuna's head and he realizes, oh, that's right, the boy is from back then. Kenjaku, you do the grossest things. And while we don't know who Yuji is to Sukuna quite yet, the reveal is rapidly approaching. Even if we go back to Shibuya, we see that Kenjaku tells the disaster curses, I don't care if you kill Yuji, go ahead, he's no longer needed to kill Gojo. But Kenjaku, like always, is lying to them. He knows they will not be able to accomplish this. Despite how Kenjaku made it seem, he still needed Sukuna for something important, because Sukuna's binding vow doesn't seem the same as everybody else's. If you are making a binding vow with Sukuna, you probably want something huge in return. Unless you're Yuji and you don't even really know what a binding vow is and you just think you're going to dumpster him, but you know, we all know how that ended. He has so effectively diverted attention away from Yuji that even Ryomen Sukuna does not realize what is about to go down. And at the end of this chapter, when he says, "My will be passed on," it is easy to forget that Kenjaku, he does care about Yuji as a son. Right at the start of the Culling Games, he thanks the students at Yuji's high school for spending time with him, and I think that's a really interesting line, especially for a character who says that Yuji Itadori is just something. And to Choso, his other quote-unquote son, he says that as long as Yuji and Ryomen Sukuna continue to coexist, the cycle of curses will never end. They'll be the eye of the storm for a new era, and now we are getting the first full power fight between Yuji and Sukuna. And I want to talk about some of the more out there ideas I've had for who Yuji is to Sukuna and whether or not they're brothers. Because Yuji and Sukuna being twins, that is the theory I like the most. I've talked about it a lot, but I'm going to talk about it more here. There is something about Yuji and Sukuna being brothers that I just think recontextualizes the story in an interesting way if it does happen. But regardless of that, the actual reveal is coming rapidly, and we're probably going to get it in the actual Yuji versus Sukuna fight. I think that by the end of the Save Megumi mini arc, we're just going to have to know who Ryomen Sukuna actually is to Yuji Itadori. And even though I don't think this will be the final confrontation between Yuji and Sukuna, that will likely happen once Megumi is free, it is the prelude. And as for Kenjaku, I don't feel like this is as much of a Gojo situation where they say Gojo's won for Yuta as a lot of people seem to think it is. When we saw Sukuna and what looked like a dire situation, we know, okay, he kind of has to fight Yuji later, so something is probably going to happen. But in this situation, Kenjaku got his head lopped off by the guy who said he was going to kill Kenjaku, and there's not really a big set-up fight for Kenjaku besides Yuta. Even if he's able to open up a domain just as a head right now, even Yuki almost made it to Kenjaku with just simple domain, and Yuta is right there. And we also just saw that a base Yuta is capable of perception blitzing Kenjaku to some degree, so I just don't see what Kenjaku could do fast enough to just get away. There is the chance that, like Toji theorized, if you kill Geto, or Kenjaku in this case, every single curse spirit comes out at once. But like the anti-gravity technique, the curse spirit manipulation, that is a part of Kenjaku's brain at this point. So again, for that to happen, Kenjaku has to die, and that just seems like the most likely outcome here. And Kenjaku has been going back and forth on changing Culling Games rules, causing glitches, and I think that's what he's going to do here. He can still talk, he has a tremendous amount of points, so if there is a rule he has been waiting on secretly, this would be the time to do it. There is a chance he could just Omega Brain Tendril himself away like an Evil Dead creature, but at the end of the day, Kenjaku just being ahead, it's not a good position to be in. We're going to see the results of this pretty soon, and Kenjaku could just be a hostage. He does know a lot, and if I were the characters in this story, I probably want to ask him some questions. But then again, the characters in this story hate plot reveals, and they pretty much asked Angel, a Heian Era sorcerer that knew Sukuna, nothing. You'd really think they'd ask her a little bit more about this whole he is the fallen thing, but no, they're just like, well, you know, that sounds like a plot reveal for another day. We have more important things to do anyways, like send Gojo that email about the open barrier. Those are my opinions on this chapter and the full translations, which are pretty much identical to the spoiler translations. But like I said, this is a pretty big event in JJK, and Kenjaku being potentially put down, that is simply worthy of talk. And Yuta fans are finally rewarded for gassing their boy for years, and they've been suffering from jokes about Yuta being an anxious wreck this entire time, so finally they get to eat. Also, as an end note, some people think that Takaba is dead. Nah, he's just vibing, you know, he's just hanging out. I saw some people say that he put on ceremonial clothing for a funeral, and clearly that's Kenjaku's funeral, but that will be confirmed next week. So if you like content like this, subscribe for more, and as always, thanks for watching.